Hello, everyone. I'm Jim Garrison, and I want to welcome you to day 7 of this special program on Humanity Rising that has been focusing on the Conference of Parties in Glasgow that is taking place between the 1st of November and the 12th of November. So we're right about at the middle. And over the last 2 days, Saturday and today, Sunday, there has been thousands of people on the streets in Glasgow. You'll recall that the last Friday, there was a big youth-led manifestation in which Greta Thunberg spoke. Yesterday, according to press reports, there was upwards of 100,000 people on the streets in consternation at the lack of action on the part of governments at this very critical moment when we are in code red. Climate change is becoming irreversible. And yet our governments are refusing to take the kind of action that is required. So there has been very intense citizen activity. And we want to start our program today with Osprey Oriole Lake, who's the founder of the Women's Earth Climate Action Network, who's been there in Glasgow with a whole delegation of people. Osprey and We Can supports women, particularly Indigenous women, all over the world that are on the front lines of climate justice. So, Osprey, we want to welcome you to begin our program today to tell us, from your point of view, what's been happening there in Glasgow and anything that you want to share with our global audience.
Well, thanks for having me, Jim, and thanks for the work that you're doing to host these sessions during the COP. It is about 4 o'clock in the afternoon here in Glasgow, and it's Sunday. And yesterday was quite a big day, as Jim mentioned, and Friday as well, with a lot of street action. Yesterday, I think they said between 150 or 200,000 people on the street. I'm not really sure. We marched through some pretty heavy Scottish rain here. Really the people's movements calling out to governments to take climate justice action, not just action, but from a climate justice framework. I think that's really important to distinguish what is it that the people's movements are really calling for. We want action, but what type of action actually really matters. It was very important. There's a lot of Indigenous peoples here from African countries, from countries all over the world, from Latin American countries, people who are on the front lines, Black leaders, Black community leaders, Indigenous leaders, Latina leaders, all really talking about the inequities that they're now facing. And of course, as Jim said, we work with women's organizations. So we are also very concerned about what is happening with the impacts of the climate crisis on women. So, looking at this in its entirety, there is a demand for systemic change, that we can't have business as usual, and that we really need policies that are going to reflect the needs of the people, meaning that social, racial, and economic justice is really centered in these negotiations, which are not the case at the moment. So we've had a whole first week, a lot of different events that we hosted and press conferences. And we're very engaged in bringing forward a message, like many of the grassroots groups, really advocating with governments that not only must they move at speed, which they're not right now in the negotiation rooms themselves. We're halfway through. And just to give you a little bit of a window into the negotiations, the strategy from the COP presidency and the UNFCCC this year was to bring a lot of the high level leaders from countries together at the beginning of the week to sort of tell all the ministers, get this done, and tell the negotiators, get this done. One of the big things being negotiated, not to get too wonky here, is Article 6, which is this very controversial around market mechanisms, things that many of us in the movement do not agree with how it's being approached around what's called different carbon trading and market mechanisms that can really harm frontline communities, that are not real solutions, and what we call false solutions, which would take me an hour to go through. So just look up false solutions. There's a great report called Hoodwinked in the Hothouse. You can look that up and really see an in-depth analysis about what is the problem with the false solutions that are being negotiated. So Article 6 is something that's been kicked down the road quite a bit in these negotiations. It's being hammered out now. And, you look at the whole document, it's pages and pages long, and, it has brackets everywhere. I think they're up to 300 brackets, meaning each country negotiating out what they think is going to be fair, what kind of transparency is going to happen. And so here we are in the first full week, and they haven't gotten past, I believe, clearing up, the brackets, which are going to go on and on, arguing over every word. So what can they get done? We'll see. If they don't get more done, they're going to be getting calls from their leadership saying, putting on the pressure by the end of this week to get an agreement going. The problem is that the agreement that's being negotiated doesn't even match what we need it to be to stay well below 1.5 degrees warming and global temperature. So even what is being fought over, if you will, or negotiated, does not meet our standards from a climate justice framework. So you might be hearing terms like net zero. We're fighting for net zero, certain types of commitments by 2030 or by 2050. There's a lot of challenge there because, first of all, 2030 and 2050 is a little bit late. We seem to be having like catastrophic fires now around the world. The rate of biodiversity loss is huge. We already are seeing floods and droughts and disasters everywhere all over the world. Like, we need for governments to call a climate emergency. That's what really needs to happen here, and act as if we are, because we are in an emergency. So it's very key that governments move much more swiftly, but also in a way that centers justice. And that is a problem. There's too much inequities. The global north needs to take its responsibility for its historical emissions. The global south is saying, if we're going to make this change, where's the money? You got to help us make this change in a good way so we can get to renewables and have a just transition and not stay dependent on fossil fuels. But we don't want this net zero, because net zero involves some of these false solutions I was talking about, which is really looking at how you can create carbon offsets. So instead of stopping pollution at source, the fossil fuel companies, as an example, or people engaged in destruction of forests, can buy carbon credits elsewhere. That's not really going to get us to where we need to go. We want real zero, not net zero. And that's one of the big statements that we're making here at the COP. They're also relying a lot on geoengineering, which is a lot of technology fixes. Again, if you think about it, why would we want to be geoengineering Mother Earth's natural systems? We've done plenty to harm Mother Earth's natural systems, and then to interfere just seems a lot of hubris to think that we're going to step in with our human technologies and fix the atmosphere. Some of these things have not been tested. Some of them aren't even at cost and scale. And yet again, these different commitments that are reliant on net zero are based on these techno fixes that we don't even know if they're going to work or if they're safe. So there's a lot of complexity around not just what's being negotiated, but the actual meaning of those negotiations, and a disagreement from the people's movements around how this should be resolved. The other thing I would say, and then I'll stop here, Jim, for any questions you might have, is that, one of the big elephants in the room is, as many of you might know, the Paris Agreement, which, we were all really happy was, fought for in 2015. Governments across the world signed it. There was still, a lot of insufficiency in it, but it was a global agreement. We have to remember fossil fuels are not even mentioned in the Paris Agreement. No oil, no gas, no coal. So the entire supply end, meaning the fossil fuels themselves, is not an agreement. It's all about reducing emissions where we can have these offsets, carbon offsets and carbon trading markets. All of that is in there. So people can keep doing business as usual, which we need to stop, which Mother Earth has made it very clear we need to stop our activities. And where's the mention of the fossil fuels? And so a question I've been bringing to a lot of the meetings I'm participating in with government leaders and ministers is, where is the leadership to stand up to the fossil fuel industry? Let's really open up the curtain and realize that there's a very tight relationship between a lot of elected leaders and money coming from the fossil fuel industry. So we need to shut down the fossil fuel industry. We need to transition to clean energy now, but that keeps getting kicked down the road because there's so much interlocking connection between the fossil fuel industry and governments. And that's something that we have to keep surfacing is, you can't keep putting fossil fuels into the atmosphere and think we're going to get somewhere. And I think something I am excited about is I'm on the steering committee of the Fossil Fuel Non-Proliferation Treaty. So we're also trying to push this idea of countries getting behind, stopping their fossil fuel extraction and expansion. And this is really important because the UN Environment Program found that governments still plan to produce more than double the amount of fossil fuels in 2030 than would be consistent with limiting global warming to 1.5 degrees. So our governments are still planning to do more expansion and extraction of fossil fuels. So I keep asking, how can we go into this COP with these impossible numbers? Not to mention that financial institutions are still funding the fossil fuel industry, and that also must stop. So both in the financial sector with financial institutions and the government, we've got to wean ourselves off of fossil fuels. And this is the point of a big rub.
Thank you, Osprey. The challenges that you're laying out are indeed daunting. One question that I have, since you've been at so many of the COPs over the years, and you've participated, year round on climate justice issues in different parts of the world, as you've experienced COP26, how would you compare both the government comportment and the citizen action at COP26 from the other ones over the previous years? Is there a different atmospheric quality? What would you say to that?
It's hard to say because, when you're in each COP, it just feels so enormous and sort of, everyone's on the edge of their seat because we understand that we're talking about, our survival as a species, and especially, Black, Brown, Indigenous, Global South, island nation peoples who are already suffering. Their lives are on the line, and the intensity each COP you feel. So, I don't know if this one is more intense than the others, but it certainly feels that way. I mean, things have gotten so much worse, and then we skipped the COP last year, so it's been 2 years. And in those 2 years, things with the climate crisis have really worsened, and the social inequities have grown. And so it's really intense. It's really intense. The negotiators feel the pressure, as they should, and the action in the street of frustration and anger is huge. There's been a lot of inequities at this COP. Yes, we all understood as civil society, it would be a very challenging COP because of COVID, and it has been. I mean, it's just getting through the front door of the negotiations is very laborious and exhausting. And also, because of the inequities and the lack of organization by the COP presidency, the UK COP presidency, they had a whole year to plan. And in my opinion, they did not plan well. And as a result, a lot of Global South, civil society, and even government leaders are not here because by the time they got their visas and they went through all their COVID things and they didn't get their COVID shots and all the things that were told and promised didn't happen, this is probably one of the most, unequal COPs I've ever been to in terms of representation. And it was promised to be the COP of inclusivity. It is the COP of exclusivity. And then even as we go into the different negotiating rooms, the amount of civil society allowed is really narrowed. So getting people's voices heard is really difficult. So that's been really quite different, is that there's just the social inequities have been quite massive. And we're really sorry that our sisters and brothers from the global south are not here. The ones being impacted the worst should be here, having their voices heard, and we're having to do our best to represent them and bring them in virtually. And it's quite emotional. I mean, I would lie if I didn't say I've cried several times since I've been here. It's palatable, the fact that our lives are on the line, the destruction to Mother Earth is on the line. I mean, Mother Earth will survive us, but this is not, I want us to be a dignified humanity. I want us to figure out how we're going to walk through this small keyhole of time in a way of beauty making, of dignity, of care for the plants and animals in our human family, and reciprocity. I don't want us to move to extinction out of these pitiful reasons of corporate greed and political power and hubris. Like, we need to lift ourselves up, and that's what needs to happen here.
And quick question, and then Indra, I don't know whether you have any questions or any of the panelists for Osprey, but given the exclusionary constraints of the UK government and COP26, where has that left the people on the streets? Is there a higher sense of integration and collaboration as all of you are moving through the COP? Are people feeling isolated and alienating? Is there more discussion of sort of violent direct action if they don't listen to reason? I mean, where has that left the movement and the hundreds of thousands of people that are there in Glasgow?
Well, there's actions going on every day, all day, inside the COP, outside the COP. There was a big meeting of financial institutions, and a lot of us went there and protested outside their front door. There's actions on all the things I've talked about 1.5 being kept alive, the inequities. So there is disruption happening everywhere all the time. And again, a lot of these things I'm not privy to say. A lot of this is all being done in quiet channels. Sure. But all I can say is that, things are going to get ramped up this week as we head towards the end of the week and we start hearing the details of what the negotiators have come up with. And, there will be more heated activities, because there needs to be an expression from civil society to government to let them know, no, this is not what we are agreeing to, and this is not acceptable.
Yeah. So over this next week, basically until next Friday, the ministers and the officials are working on final details of presumably some protocols that will be released around or immediately after the 12th of November, which will conclude the COP and set the stage for the next year of negotiations. Is that correct?
That's right. And that is part of the frustration. Is this is COP 26.
Yeah.
The planet is burning 26 years later, and it's because of the money. And it's the things I said earlier. It's not like we don't know what to do. There's a plethora of solutions, from agroecology to indigenous knowledge, from feminist climate policies and economics to you name it. You show these things on Humanity Rising for the whole year. We're not having a solutions problem. People have the answers. Community-led solutions are there. There is not a solutions problem. There is interference by government, big business, corporations to let those solutions unfold. So that's why we're here to fight. People are always like, let's, have this, hold hands, kumbaya moment. We need that. We need to be warriors and we need to be healers, warriors and healers. We need both because this is a fight. I kid you not. This is a fight. At the same time, we need to be in healing spaces and generating these beautiful solutions for the future and growing our gardens and living our lives in a beautiful way and having self-care. So we need both, but right now the fight is on here.
Yeah. Can I ask you a question, Osprey? When I listen to Greta, she's always saying two things at the same time now, but more recently she's been emphasizing the fact that this has already been a failure, but yet she believes we will win. So she seems to have this new, and really emphasizing that the people will overcome somehow in some sense. And I've always felt with Extinction Rebellion, a real determination to show the joy, of being in this moment, showing their life force, if you like, and determining to be, representatives of the planet Earth, even in the streets. Can you feel that as well in the atmosphere? Almost as if, you're feeling, my experience has always been that you're feeling more than one thing. You're feeling many things at once.
Yeah, no, I think that's really true. I mean, we're not living in a binary moment at any level in any way. Everything is very interwoven and multifaceted. It's a multivalent moment where there's incredible joy of being with, like I haven't seen some of my colleagues in a year and a half, and just huge love and celebration going on of people meeting. And certainly we utilize this time to strategize. We're having incredible strategy sessions and sharing the love and the joy of being alive and thriving in this moment. Today, I was really honored to participate in an Indigenous-led water ceremony. We went down to the water and had two beautiful Indigenous women elders guide us through a beautiful water ceremony. And it was just so healing and wonderful. And so there's a lot of celebration, a lot of healing spaces, a lot of good dialogue going on, a lot of strategy. Absolutely. And the march, I mean, everyone's just drenched and having a wonderful time. And getting out there and having our voices heard collectively. And the flip side is, we're in the fight of all fights. We're in a fight of all fights. So yes, everything is going on at the same time. But, just to close on your question, we know whatever happens, nature, the natural laws of Mother Earth is going to get this straightened out, because she's forcing the wealthy countries to realize with the vaccinations, with keeping carbon emissions down, you have to invest in everyone. Everyone has to win together. Mother Earth is going to ensure that this works out, even if a bunch of people die, which I don't want to have happen. We have to all care for each other. And I think the most important thing that we need to take away as a global North country, which I'm from, is we need to really keep track of the issue of frontline communities and those impacted first and worst, because what I find unacceptable is that there are sacrificed people and sacrificed zones. We cannot come up with solutions that just work for wealthy people and wealthy countries and continues white supremacy. And I think that's really important, that we don't, sort of have this bubble that leaves out those people who are our sisters and brothers on the front line, and their voices need to be centered now more than anyone else. Black, brown, Indigenous folks need to be heard, and they need to be leading. They need to be the center of this conversation.
Osprey, thank you so much. I know you're very, very busy there and have to keep on going, but we love you and we support you and extend all our love and gratitude to all your friends and colleagues. And we wish you all the best over the next week as you continue to put pressure on the governments to do the absolutely obvious. Blessings.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. And thank you to all the panelists that are here. I'm sure it's going to be a great panel. Take care, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Osprey.
Bye-bye. I know we're needing to get on with our panel, but I want to bring in Dita Bezzoso briefly, who's also there in Glasgow. And then after we hear from her, Indra, we can start the panel, but that'll give a good backdrop, live reports from Glasgow for this panel on citizen action. So Dita, why don't you give us a report on what's going on as you've been experiencing it there?
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Can you hear me today? Great.
Yeah.
Yes, I can echo what Osprey was saying. There's a lot of anger, a lot of beautiful people as well in Glasgow. The amazing Glaswegian hospitality is really, really. Hello.
He's fat.
No, he isn't.
Yeah, can I get his phone number?
Anyway. And it's a really real mixture of there's a real mixture of disillusion, and I think a lot of people were not expecting anything to come from the summit and from the conversations. And what I'm seeing, and I just wanted to show you where I am. There's been a lot of beautiful activities made by organized by Extinction Rebellion today, where we actually listened to some of the people who have been excluded from the blue zone and from the green zone, amazingly. People from Africa who are denouncing the oil that is still being drilled and the plans that are being made for extracting more oil and destroying even more lands. And we had a beautiful moment a beautiful and sad moment of going through the names of the people who have died in the last year in several countries of Africa due to the exploration for oil and all the conflict and war that is bringing. So what I'm seeing is also a lot of networking. People are coming together. There is a sense of agency, even at the individual level, and that's my hope. It's not about. I think we do need like all the work that people like Osprey are doing at the moment, and that fight that is happening at that level is crucial. And people, individuals, organizations are coming together to solve how they are going to grow their food, how they're going to live in a different way, how we are going to tackle the homelessness problem that is really connected to climate change. And that is happening at the same time. So that is my message of hope from Glasgow today.
Thank you, Dita. It's so wonderful to hear from you each day as you've been able to appear. Indra, do you want to make a quick comment on anything that Dita said?
Well, I really appreciate, Dita, what you're saying, because in a way that's really what we're going to explore over the next couple of hours. The frustration for people of, showing with their whole heart, the desire for governments to take action can leave them really very frustrated when they can't see any immediate response, And so the question is, what can they do with their energy, their determination, their willingness to be in action? And of course, there's much they can do, and we're going to be exploring some of those things in this next hour. But, even to think of, everything that you do as, in a way, the rebellious act, as the thing that breaks the system, as the thing that is renewing, whatever you do with your energy and your commitment really is citizens' action. So thank you for everything you're describing there.
Thank you. And yes, citizen action, that's what I'm seeing. And again, this goes beyond hope. people are really making plans for what are we going to do the week and the week after that. Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Dita. Now, Indra, I want to just bring in one more brief report, and then we'll just go into your program for the balance of the time. But I want to everyone go to sort of another extreme of direct action. You know, we've been hearing about what's been going on there in Glasgow, and I want to now, Rick, if you could elevate Basia Alexander and Jim Conroy to panel status. We have two people who are tree whisperers, and they're taking direct action of a very different sort. Under their own resources and time, they've traveled from the East Coast of the United States to the West Coast, to where they've been having, as you all know, we've been having massive record-breaking fires. And they've been in the fire zones, just like Osprey and Dita have been in the COP zone. These are a couple that have been in the fire zone. And they were yesterday out in the Caldor fire, which is one of the biggest fires of the year. So Basha and Jim, give us a brief report of what you've been doing there in Northern California to tend to our trees. And then we'll launch our program.
Great.
Basha?
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jim. Thank you for
Jim.
having
Yeah,
us.
We're so grateful to you and Humanity Rising to give us an opportunity to give an on-site report about our environmental healing work. We feel that, thank you for saying this too, we feel that in our own small way, we are doing a powerful kind of citizen action because we're engaging directly with the sentience and intelligence of trees and ecosystems in order to improve their health. And in doing so, we call on the spirit of humanity as well to be a part of that. And we know that the idea of healing trees is unconventional. And our approach is to connect, communicate, collaborate, and co-create with their life force and intelligence by using bioenergy overlap and interactions in consciousness. No products are ever used. The healing of internal functionality is done from the inside out. We also teach this work. Our motto is heal ecological damage, upgrade people's thinking, which is so incredibly important, and it's the other half. We feel that people who learn and do our mindful methods are taking a kind of citizen action. They are often speaking with trees in order to better speak for trees. So today we're actually reporting on the Lake Oroville area. We go to the Caldor fire today, but that area is unusual in this sense that they had their fire was about almost a year ago, and since then they've had extreme drought until they just got a little rain about a week ago and yesterday while we were there. So just because it rained doesn't mean that they're suddenly healthy or able to grow. And Dr. Jim will now explain the path to healing that these trees said that they need. And you will hear him say we, because he often speaks as if he were a tree. Dr. Jim.
Yeah, we want to put the slide on,
Okay,
Basha,
so
for
we
me.
can share your slide.
So what we do is we heal the internal functionality of trees and plants. I don't want to start there.
Yeah, okay, here we go.
There. We heal the internal functionality of trees and plants. As Basha says, we work from the inside out. So in the case of the trees around the Oroville area, again, these burned in late 2020. We couldn't get there in 2020. We wouldn't travel because of the pandemic, okay? And so we couldn't travel there. But we did treat finally in May of 2021, which is fine because the fire was late in the season last season. We kind of got there in spring of this year, which was kind of perfect because that's a time when we need it, when they're starting to put out their new growth for the year. That was when we want to be there, is to help them bring on that new growth, especially trees that are in fire, because various parts and functions from fire have been disconnected. Now, these, I'm primarily talking about the trees that did not burn crispy. Okay, they have some life in them. They lost all their leaves and their needles completely, but they still have some life in them. They're burned, the bark is burned, but they still have life. Sometimes they burn so much, it's just so crispy, and the consciousness of the tree says, I can't use this physical form anymore. I'm going to go on and call forth a new form out of the void and move into that form. So that's what the consciousness of the tree does. But in this case, we're working with the trees that still have the opportunity to live. So we treated those in May 2021. Then a drought followed. So now you kind of get a double whammy on the trees. All right. So they started to recover, and then you get this drought. So what did the drought do? Well, one of the things it did, it gave a blockage primarily in the tubes that go into the leaves of the tree. We call it the gate. Okay. That's just a term that Basha and I use because very often if there's sudden climate changes or sudden shocks to the tree, that's one of the areas they get blocked. So what happens is the tree can't use the food it's making because they can't get fluid into the leaves to get food and fluid out of the leaves. Okay, that's what happens. So what we have to do is open up that gate. Okay, that's the job. And then the same with the branches to buds. The buds, they can't get food and fluids into the buds, so the buds don't grow. Or in this case, in the case of the fires, the cells don't differentiate into buds. Okay, so that's what happens there. And then growth is slowed. So what we had to do is kickstart the whole tree again. In other words, open up that whole system again. So the kickstart treatment looks like this. Okay, we open the gate, branches to leaves and needles, and the branches to buds. How do we do that? Well, it's a combination of working with the circulation in the tree, but also we work with a little light energy and life energy of the tree a little bit. And that's the initial step. We work with the light energy, life energy, and universal rhythm to kind of open that up a little bit. We start to get some fluid flow into the leaves or needles, food out, break down the food. That's a natural reaction in the plants. They break down the food. There's an energy release out of that breakdown. When it's a complex carbohydrate, breaks down to simple sugars. There's an energy release. That energy release drives the circulation. So it's the combination of light energy, life energy, universal rhythm, working with that, along with driving the circulation. That opens up that gate inside of the tree. So we get nice flow in those leaves and in those needles to get, as the tree is making more food, we start to get flow in there. We clear those blockages. Okay, so you can get flow of fluid into the leaves or the needles, whatever the case might be, and then fluids in, and then food and fluid out. Okay, and then we're also able to get food into the buds because we've cleared that blockage for the buds. The circulation tubes on a tree, just so you understand, I'll say it really quickly. They're xylem and phloem. They're right underneath the bark of a tree. They're what makes up the annual rings on a tree. Quick botany lesson here. That's what makes the annual rings on a tree. So they put out new xylem and phloem each year. Xylem takes the fluids up the tree. Phloem brings fluids down the tree. Okay, so that happens there. So what we do is we kickstart the treatment. We kickstart the tree, get the whole system open up in the tree, and then what we want to do is make a sustainable, a continuous sustainable loop in the tree, so the tree can continue to grow and flourish. So what we do is we work with the leaves a little bit more. We work to increase photosynthesis in the leaves the tree does have. Remember, the trees came through a fire, so and now they can get fluid in and food out of those leaves. Okay, and the food breaks down. You had energy release into the simple sugars, and that energy release drives the circulation, okay, of food, simple sugars, and fluids around the tree. That clears the blockages. All right, then we get the good distribution of food and fluids. Well, first of all, we want to get it to the current growing points, the leaf buds, those buds that had started to grow, the roots and the tubes. In this case, what had happened is some of the tissues had started to differentiate after the fire into leaf buds, but then they kind of stopped growing because that gate got blocked, because they weren't getting, number one, the buds weren't getting food or fluid, and the tree wasn't able to access it just wasn't able to access any of that food that it was making, even in those buds. All right. So what we want to do here is open that up. So we're getting good distribution now of fluids and food to the current growing points, which are the leaf buds, roots, and tubes, and to any tissues that can differentiate into buds. We still want to create some new buds there, because again, these are burnt trees. Okay. So what happens then? Then you get some cell division starting. You get some leaves forming to make more food, roots, better uptake of fluids and nutrients, and more. And in the tubes, that xylem and phloem that I said, for better circulation in the tree. And then we start the whole program over again, because then what you have is you've already made some leaves. We work with those leaves to increase the photosynthesis, and we start this cycle all over again. And that's what we're trying to do, to create the nice sustainable cycle. What's the result of this? The trees flourish, they begin to leaf out, they begin to flourish, they just gradually begin to grow, okay, fill out, even whatever tissues can grow, and they fill out, the tree lives, it begins to flourish, the forests flourish, and we move on with a healthy ecosystem. And that's what we're trying to do here. Just as a reference point here, just show you, this is the lake area, and you can see by the side there of the lake, you can see how dry it is and how low that lake is. You can see the shore of the lake there, and just how low it is because of the severe drought. The thing that's helping us out now is, again, we've just recently had some rains in there, and that really helps out the situation. There's sufficient water to at least get circulation going in those trees, and hopefully the rains keep coming to help the trees out. It's not enough rain to fully sustain the trees, but hopefully that rain will continue to come, and those trees can continue to grow and flourish.
Thank you, Jim.
And now the question is, what can people do? People can do these mindful methods at home. They visualize and they whisper using powerful phrases. This is done through overlap of bioenergy and overlap of consciousness. So anyone can be on the tree front lines and take action by visualizing water and food circulating freely around in the tree's tubes, and to whisper from their hearts, more food means more growth means more food, food and growth make a healthy tree. You can use this image or whatever image works for you. And we invite people to live this way: connection experiences with trees, communicate, collaborate, and co-create. So thank you again so much for giving us this opportunity, and we honor everyone who is on the front lines there at COP.
Thank you, Basha. Thank you, Jim. So everyone, we've had citizen action across a range over the last 30 minutes. We'll be hearing more from Basha and Jim over the subsequent days, but now I want to turn it over to Indra Adnan, who is the convener of our theme today on citizen action. Indra is the co-initiator of the Alternative UK. She's also the author of a recent book, The Politics of Waking Up. So she's particularly suited to convene a whole session on humanity rising as we focus in on the Conference of Parties there in Glasgow, and the utility of citizen action in the face of real systemic refusal of our governments to do what is absolutely obvious. And as Osprey and Dita were indicating that gap is the fulcrum that we have to really deal with very deeply. And Indra's brought together a panel today to discuss some of the efficacies, but also some of the complexities of citizen action in our contemporary reality. So Indra, thank you. And with this context, I just turn the rest of the program over to you.
Thank you so much, Jim. And it's really been an incredible series that you've pulled together for Humanity Rising so far. So much going on at this moment in time, in history. All eyes are on Glasgow, but being able to see Glasgow through the eyes of Humanity Rising has made a huge difference for so many people. So thank you so much. I am absolutely going to focus on the big question of what is citizens' action and what can every kind of citizen do? Obviously, not all of us could get to Glasgow, even if in our hearts we really would have loved to have been there. But I remember, one of the things that I remember so strongly from that very first session that we attended, when Vandana Shiva talked about her many decades of action. And then she mentioned that she had a chance to give Greta Thunberg some advice. And her advice was, it's fantastic to strike and, it's great that you've decided to do that on a Friday. But let's also think about what you might be doing for the other 6 days of the week. Because in fact, there's so much that citizens can be prefiguring, if you like, doing ahead of governments. If governments are not ready to act yet, or they may be, there's every sign that they wouldn't know how to really use the great resources of the citizens, even if they switch that way. And what we're going to be exploring over this next hour or so with these great panelists that are joining us today is, what could citizens' action look like? And I'm going to start by just giving a quick overview of this idea that citizens' action is much more than is generally talked about in the media. So this is here what I call an integral whole systems perspective on citizens' action. When you think about a citizen as being simply a person who lives within a polity that has every right to be using the resources of the whole, especially at this moment of intense crisis. So if you look at this whole map here, don't imagine that these are necessarily just different groups of people. There are also the many ways that each one of us can be in action at different points of the day, at different points of the year, or at different points in our lifetime. At certain times we will be reacting to events. At other times we'll be joining movements. At other times we will be in protest, really using our voice against the system that is dominant. But at other times we'll be institution building. At other times we'll be strategizing, perhaps working with those in power to strategize for better outcomes in the system. But here, from 6 onwards, it's a little bit more about the new system arising, civil society development, movement building, growing, and then this growing in necessity for systems convening. Everything that you're doing, Jim, with Humanity Rising, that we're doing with the alternative, that all kinds of new media systems need to be doing is looking at what is going on across the whole of the system. And then the final thing maybe is when we reach a certain self-awareness, or we're ready to be in a certain level of self-awareness, that we can really feel that the way that we are being every day in every waking moment is part of the whole system changing. But if in fact all of this is possible at any given time, we could all be forgiven by, for thinking that in the world of the internet or in the global stage, that how on earth can we get any traction? Can we get any traction with all of this, in this plethora of possibilities happening all the time in a very fragmented system? And at the Alternative UK, we came to a very firm conclusion that complex systems need incubators. They need places where a microsystem can really work out all the problems of people coming together and bringing these different forms of agency, and then moving into relationship with each other. This can happen at the community level in what we call a fractal way, meaning that we're going to be developing patterns that then can be replicated throughout the whole. And in each one of these microsystems or containers, or what we call citizens action networks or community agency networks, all of which share an acronym, CAN. So in the midst of these CANs, we're trying to bring these needs together. The needs for the biopsychospiritual entity that is the human being to flourish, the needs to share tools and practices, the need to bring a new culture altogether. So how do we shift the culture of people being together from one that is nearly always conflict driven to one that is really joyful and prioritizing the energy that we can generate between us? And then, of course, we need to build these new structures for participation of all of our agency, both online and offline. And we need to move from the local to the cosmo-local. And we'll be exploring a bit more of that in the course of this hour. So just remembering that we are not homo economicus. In other words, we're not people that simply need to have our material needs met, but that we have complex psychosocial needs. And that when we really recognize that we all share and are in fact driven by trying to get these needs met all the time, that it's only really within CANs that this kind of meeting of our needs, of our complex needs, can be delivered. We won't simply be able to deliver those online. And in the process of building our CANs, we have to remember that there's all of these people we have to bring together. Our political systems have really worked to divide us against each other, so much so that, in fact, half the country, in most of the developed world, half the country is actively invested in the failure of the other half. Are we surprised that we haven't been able to really use the resources of ordinary people to meet the crisis? And eventually, the Alternative UK is interested in building a new political system. And what will be at the heart of this is this new axis, the connection of the complex human being to the complex community, having an impact upon the complex global space or the planet as we know it. So this, what we call we world, is the new axis, if you like, of the new political system that is arising. And what's great is that we don't have to initiate it at all. It's certainly not something that we, the Alternative, are trying to initiate on behalf of everyone else. In fact, what we're doing is simply convening and showing what is already happening. So in the center there, you might get the sorts of initiatives that happen in a prototypical CAN, but around the edges, you'll see that these CANs already exist, and networks, the CANs of CANs, are everywhere, whether you're saying transition towns or eco-villages or the neighborocracy network in India or Corporation Jackson, there are just so many. People have been coming together in these CANs for decades now. The real trick is to pay attention to them, to participate in them, to tell more stories about them, and simply to invest in them. And then this possibility, the cosmo-local coming together, is a force and a power that will have, that will speak loudly and clearly to governments in ways that they haven't really been hearing until now. And I'm just using these two sketches here to remind us that, while Elon Musk is busy literally trying to move planets. He'd like to escape to Mars and leave planet Earth behind, the one that has been fully trashed. And himself and his elites can go somewhere else and start all over again. But the rest of us, we're building this new planet in our heads right now. We can build it in our minds and our consciousness, and we can all go and occupy that place together and build on it in a real way. And that's something that we'll be exploring later in this session. We call it the parallel polis. So I'm going to stop there. And now I'm going to introduce our first guest today, Anira Rosenklew. And Anira and I first met when Anira was still just moving from Extinction Rebellion, if you like, to something else, a new form of expression and a new form of being constantly active. Anira, please do introduce yourself as fully as you like and show us what you've been doing.
Oh, thank you, Indra, and thank you everyone today. It's been so interesting so far, and I can't wait to listen to the rest of the people speaking. So yeah, my name is Anira, and I am an educator, so kind of a trained teacher. And I'm going to share some slides, kind of, because I'm going to talk to you a little bit about an organisation that I helped kind of initiate, along with lots of others, called Trust the People. And Trust the People is an organisation and movement that is looking at building democracy in our communities. So getting it out there in the grassroots and sharing the tools to build resilient and connected communities where people are able to respond to the needs of the people and the planet, which we know is not happening at the moment. And I'll give you a little bit of background about how Trust the People started. Oh no, in fact, before I do that, we're going to do some visioning. So I'm going to ask you to do a little bit of thinking, because so much of our stuff is community based, and it's thinking about what kind of communities we'd like to live in. What would our ideal communities look like? So I'm going to give you kind of about 45 seconds, and if you want, close your eyes to imagine what your ideal community would look like. And this could be about the relationships that people have, how people communicate, the food systems, how it's set up physically, how it's set up socially. So yeah, I'll just invite you to close your eyes if you wish and think about what your ideal community would look like. And there's no holds barred. This is your imagination. You can take it as far as you want.
It looks like Anira's frozen.
Oh, well, I'm just giving people a 45 seconds to imagine what their ideal community would look like.
Oh, I see. Sorry.
Closing your eyes if you'd like to. There are my chimes at the end of those. It's not very long to do, but to think about our communities. But I wanted to start with this kind of visioning and imagination exercise, because we're often discouraged from imagining. I mean, working in a school, I know that everything I did in the secondary school, which in the States would be kind of for teenagers, is kind of shutting down our capacity to think creatively with our exams-based system, and that stops us realizing that there is something alternative and much better that is possible, and taking time to think about that and thinking about how we can build the world that we want and need is really powerful, because then we can start taking steps to put that into action. And Trust the People is really about helping people enact the visions that they might have for their ideal community. And I'll give you a little bit of information about what brought us here, what brought me here talking to you today, and what started Trust the People. And as Indra said, we started kind of in Extinction Rebellion. So I met a lot of people who I work with who are kind of very good friends and colleagues in Extinction Rebellion a couple of years ago. And part of Extinction Rebellion is this Future Democracy Hub, which imagines kind of different ways that we can actually live in a democracy, because we don't live in a democracy right now. Like the crises that we're facing, the climate crisis, the different kind of the inequality crisis, just it's a crisis of democracy, because if our democracy was working, like we wouldn't be in the situations that we're in. Like we would be acting in the interests of survival of our species. So this part of Extinction Rebellion looks at this, and it brought together I guess quite a few of us who wanted to imagine something different. And that was partly from despair and awareness that, yeah, there is no planet B, and we are in this climate and ecological emergency. And there's mass biodiversity loss. We've already heard today about the awful things that are happening around the world with climate change. And then there's also rampant wealth inequality and inequality, racial inequality, gender inequality. There are so many problems in societies that are ensuring that some people are really benefiting and extracting and doing so at the expense of a lot of people. And I mean, in the UK, in the past year with COVID, the amount of billionaires has increased its highest level. And we've got 1/5 of our population, over 1/5 of our population living in poverty. And we're kind of a country with the 5th biggest economy in the world. So it's kind of just, it doesn't add up, or 5th biggest GDP when we're measuring it like that. We know that there is enough to go around, but it's being kind of stockpiled by a select few. And then COVID hit, and that's kind of exacerbated these wealth inequalities. The billionaires over the past year have made an incredible amount of money. And it's also shown us how interconnected we are. And COVID, in the UK, we had a scheme with furlough that if you had a job, the government and your company could no longer afford to pay you, the government would pay you, but you were not allowed to work for your job. And we had the situation where we'd had a lot of people come together thinking we need to work to change the system, and suddenly weren't allowed to work. So I myself was put on furlough for 2 months, and I was able to channel loads of my energy into Trust the People and into imagining a different way of being and taking the steps to put that into action. And we saw that it wasn't just us doing that. There was this enormous mutual aid network springing up of people who were connecting with strangers on their street who they might never have spoken to before. We've seen that with previous movements, like with the Occupy movement and with a lot of the activism that sprung up after like Hurricane Sandy, that these movements started and then they kind of like, they didn't fizzle away because they've created these incredible networks, but they didn't kind of reinforce themselves to go on to create change. So we had this question in our mind of being like, how can we create long-term social change? So it's not just something that appears in a time of crises, and people stick together and come together and work together in a way that helps us reshape our society. And so Trust the People was born to think about ways that we could do this. And kind of in essence, we share tools to help people support their communities in the face of local and global crises. And this is about building community resilience so that when problems do happen, which they're going to happen more and more in the future, particularly with a lack of government action, we've got people already connected, caring about people around them. So it's not just a zero-sum rush to kind of hoard resources and do things like that. So kind of just building these connected communities where people care about their neighbours and feel able to help each other. We promote participatory and deliberative democratic methods like people's assemblies. So helping people see what democracy really looks like. And I don't know how many people on this call have participated in a people's assembly, but they are incredible. And that's what how I got involved in Extinction Rebellion. I was getting involved in doing people's assemblies, and I'd never used them before. And now I use them a lot in my work. So in work that I do in schools, we hold people's assemblies. I write teaching resources, and I often include people's assemblies as a kind of end of unit activities. And yeah, they're fantastic. And so we hope that kind of spreading those in communities will help people step into their power and see what kind of having agency looks like, and see what being listened to looks like. And to kind of help build resilience and help spread people's assemblies, we run a free 8-week online education course that I'm going to tell you a little bit about in a moment. And we're also working to build a movement of movements, so collaborating with a range of organisations across the UK doing incredible work. So people taking action in their communities and creating spaces where people can discuss the climate emergency and come together, so that are called climate emergency centres, or people running as independent councillors, so beyond party politics, to be elected in their local councils. So there's a lot of kind of incredible work that we're doing, and we just want to show that there is this network and that there are these alternative ways of existing, and actually we can start shaping the world that we need. So the course, and I think this is kind of it's an introduction to community organizing. It's not going to, it can't possibly cover everything, but we pulled it together thinking about the key ingredients that could help us become more empathetic, active agents in our communities. And for this reason, the first module is called personal processing. And that's where we spend a bit of time exploring our identity, our biases, how different labels that people apply to us might impact our relationships with others, might impact how society treats us, and also how we ourselves might be applying to labels to people we meet, and making sure that we understand that we're bringing a story to every interaction, and we're shaped by our experiences and how we perceive things, and a lot of kind of working towards creating a more compassionate society is trying to reprogram ourselves and just become much more reflective in how we engage with others, and take ownership of kind of the story that we have, but also the stories that we've been exposed to, and maybe kind of being a bit more critical consumers of everything that we hear and we read about and we watch. Then our next one is engaging communities. So if we are doing community organizing, how can we ensure that we are bringing in everyone? Because in a lot of activist spaces, and this is a problem with Extinction Rebellion, and it's a problem with Trust the People, we tend to have people from the same kind of socio-economic background, the same skin color, so white, middle-class people engaging in the community organizing. And so there are a lot of voices missing from that. And as Indra was saying, if we're going to go forward and create a world that includes everyone, well, if we're going to go forward and create a kind of more progressive world in which we are looking after ourselves and nature and the world around us and reshaping the system, everyone needs to be involved. It has to be inclusive. So we explore how we might do that. We don't have all the answers, but it's just about thoughts and getting people to think, okay, who's missing from this space? Then we go into group support. So we imagine that people have met people in their communities and are going to engage in some community organizing. How can we do that in ways that are empathetic, in ways that we ensure that we're raising each other up to like our highest potential selves, and we're giving constructive feedback, but in a supportive and a compassionate way. So kind of looking at the nuts and bolts of effective group and teamwork. Then our fourth module is community assemblies. So teaching people about people's assemblies, a bit about their history, and like the process of what to do to hold them in their communities. And there's a lot of kind of support in that. Then we have a projects week where we invite people from different organizations and projects and movements around the UK and sometimes the world, and they tell people a little bit about what it is that they've done. And it's kind of so hopeful listening to these stories, because you realize that there is this network that is being built up on a really grassroots level. So we don't always hear those stories because they're not picked up in national newspapers. They're not seen to be kind of important. And I think we're addicted to kind of bad news in the UK and possibly globally. So it's kind of giving these projects a voice so people can learn a little bit more about them, and so we can be inspired by them and also support them as well. And then lastly, our last module is called community organizing. And in community organizing, my computer seems to have frozen slightly. Community organizing. And here we hold an online people's assembly for this, and we're thinking about, okay, how can we transform like local organizing into system change, and reflect on the different things that exist out there that will help us do that. And we've had a few successes in the course. Like we're currently running our fourth one, which is amazing. And the space it creates and the people it brings together is like something that feels really uplifting, and also empowering, because people are connecting and starting to work with those who they meet. And some of the things that people have done after are they've held assemblies, one in Shrewsbury on river pollution, so a people's assembly, looking at how to hold the council to account and clean up the river. Some others have organised a climate change event in Hertford, another part of the UK. Another person emailed us recently saying that after the course, they felt the confidence to be a key organiser in Climate Action St Austell. And that organisation was going to kind of disband because no one was able to do that, and they felt that they could step up and do that. They've set up climate emergency centres, and climate emergency centres, as I said before, are these spaces where people reclaim empty buildings and turn them into places where you can talk about the climate crisis, or just have spaces where you can organise community events like open mic nights. And then others have become independent councillors, which we work with an organisation called Flat Pack Democracy, and they call it kind of, flat pack, because we're building it from scratch and doing it away from party politics. And we have really good feedback. So I'll just share some of the feedback from this is from the past course. So from our third one, 100% of the people who attended it would recommend it to a friend. And people have said that the facilitators, which is just like the team, and we're quite a big team, that they support the facilitation that there is. I like this one because it's kind of thank you for taking time to create the course, and it reminds us that there's kindness out there in the world. I just thought that was quite nice. And then kind of a lot of praise for the content and the resources. And yeah, it's our fourth iteration. Several hundred people have done it, and now we're building this network. But we've also had challenges, and I think it is important to draw attention to those, because it's volunteer run. Like we don't have that much capacity. The capacity on running things depends on like people's ability to do the work around other jobs or around something that brings in money, because we don't have funding, and that can make it difficult. Retention on the course, so because it's free, sometimes we might have 150 people sign up and 75 turn up, and then our numbers drop a bit, and we're kind of trying to figure out, we want to keep it free. It's important to be inclusive, but also how can we kind of support people to complete it? Action after the course. So sometimes people have done it and they've come, sometimes people come several times because of the people they meet and because they find it really interesting, and it is different each time because of the conversations that we have. But then taking that next step into action can be difficult. And we've actually found that people are much more likely to take action when several people in the community have done it, because they've got people close by who they can work together with. And we're still quite small. Obviously, the UK has like 60 something million people. And so if we've had several hundred people do the course, obviously so they can be spread across quite broad areas. And so we're looking at how can we bring in as many people as possible from a community to do it, so that they feel more supported in doing action after. Though we do offer online support by connecting people in groups that we call hives. There's a lack of diversity in the team. As I said before, we are of different ages and a little bit of different socioeconomic backgrounds, but we are all white, and that is a problem. And then also lack of diversity in those who attend. So that's something that we're really focusing on this time. Before we run another course, we need to spend time as a team really thinking about how we can improve the diversity. And then also scaling it up. What happened? How can we make it grow? And how can we, where do we go next as well? How do we create that system change? But yeah, I just kind of wanted to end on this bit of thinking about when we're changing the system, and kind of we need to have as many different pockets of people doing, living alternative ways of being, showing that these alternatives are possible, and putting these things into action. So if it's like food co-ops or housing co-ops or energy co-ops, or just kind of holding people's assemblies on the street, because that helps us build this web of resilience. And though obviously it starts off small and it starts off spread out, we can kind of connect these up and connect the dots, and then just build a different picture and a different a different system together. And this is just going to be vital to face the challenges that come ahead, because people won't give up on this old system unless they feel that there is a viable option that they can step into. And the more grassroots activity we have, the bigger and more supportive that web will be. So yeah, that's a little bit about Trust the People. I will post the website in the chat so that if you're interested, you can find out more about it. And we do have so many free resources that are online that you can just access.
That's great. Anira, thank you so much. And I've really enjoyed so much witnessing the growth of Trust the People. And I just want to share with everybody the line that you use that really appeals to me, which is, I think, is a quote from Václav Havel, which is that you predict that you're going to win because you loved life more. And that to me really sums up the kind of spirit of Trust the People, that it's all done through reawakening this love of not only the planet, but of each other as people who are agents in the system. So thank you. Hopefully we'll have time for more conversation at the end. But for now, I just want to invite into the space Stacco Troncoso. Stacco is an avid synthesizer of information and a radical polymath, working towards elemental people-led change on a burning planet. So Stacco lives, breathes, teaches and writes on the commons and peer-to-peer politics and economics, open culture, post-growth futures, platform and open cooperatism, decentralized governments, blockchain, and more as part of his Disco Co-op. Stacco, I'm going to hand straight over to you. Welcome, really excited to see you here and love to hear what you've got to share with us.
Yeah, thank you for inviting me, and hello, everyone. So I'm going to talk about something that maybe ties in some of the threads that have arisen. I think that we all share a sense of frustration. And as Jim said, there's this consternation that, we're appealing for change, but change does not seem to be coming along. I would say that that is because we're appealing to entrenched power. We're not making counterpower. So when we expect change to come from governments and corporations, there's this nagging suspicion that this change is going to be insufficient, or is going to come too late, or at a high price. And I am sorry to say that I think that that suspicion is largely right. We live in a political economy that puts profit above everything else. I think that Osprey said, there's all these market mechanisms and false solutions being proposed, which just gnaw away at the edge of the problems rather than taking the actual problems on by the head. So we need to build counterpower. And usually this counterpower is relegated to the others. And by that I mean things like non-government institutions, non-profits, the third sector. And as you realize, these are always characterized by the negative, what they are not. Or the third sector, there's two which are better. So, a perpetual state of being a bronze medalist. So how do we build counterpower? We've talked about mutual aid, direct action, etc. But sometimes, actually often, activism is the parcel of the privilege. Afford to do activism, you will do activism. If your job will give you time off to go to a climate protest, you will go to a climate protest. But what about all the people who are not emphasizing this kind of urgent action that we need? If you're a single parent and you get home at 11 at night, your activism is not going to be activated to its fullest capacity. So what can we do? Well, there's actually a space that maybe we're not taking into account, and that is the workplace. And most of us are not only educated, to hold down a job, but we're expected to spend a third of our lives in workplaces that often enough exacerbate the same very problems that we're fighting against. So why don't we make workplaces more focused on actually providing those solutions? We've talked about that, like the solutions. This is something that we know. Why are we not spending creativity towards building those solutions? So this is what Disco is about. And I'll give you a little rundown of what Disco consists of. Hopefully I have slide superpower. Okay, so you should be able to see. I'm not sure. Can you see my slides? Yes.
Yep, we can see them, Stacko.
Fantastic. So Disco stands for organization, and it's many things, but at its core is a set of 7 principles for people to create democratic workplaces that address social.
Stacko,
Because again, what are you
Stacko,
going to do with your time?
you're freezing every once in a while. Try turning off your camera while you're doing the slideshow, okay?
Let me see if I can do that actually.
Just stop video down at the left corner.
Yeah, hang on, I think I have to turn that. Okay, so you can still hear me, yeah?
Yeah, but we don't see your slideshow.
Okay, and now you'll see the slides.
Great.
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay. So like I was saying, this more democratic workplaces for the urgent actions that we need, not waiting for governments or for corporations to.
Stacko, we're not watching your slides. We're watching a screen.
You're watching a screen, okay. So, okay, so you should be seeing a slide that says Disco.
We are. Thank you, Stacko.
Yep, it's there, Stacko. Good job.
Okay, yeah, thanks. Anyway, so let's run down the Disco DNA. So Disco is a framework, yeah, for people to create oriented workplaces. And it combines 4 main elements. The first is the common systems to meet common needs where there's a resource, there's a community that gathers around that resource, and that creates the rules to govern it. And you can find this in community different, like Wikipedia. In a community garden, the resource would be the food, the community, the people harvesting it according to their own rules, and it would be the community of editors, etc. But we create exploited by the market, but for the benefit of the community. Open co-ops is a movement that combines ethics with the tradition of cooperatives, which have been functioning quite well for the last 175 years. There's also open value accounting, which is a way of accounting for our values. And the way that we account right now accounts for GDP, accounts for growth, but it doesn't account for the things that maybe we really want to do, like take care of each other or take care of the planet. So why don't we count different? And on the subject of counting, we come to feminist is Marilyn Waring's What If Women Counted, which apart from addressing the gendered aspect, also talks about the normative sense of economics. Why does economic only describe one type of activity that we humans can do? Really working out very well in mainstream economics. So 7 Disco principles. When you create a Disco, which is basically a sort of co-op, you will put in your social and environmental ends, nothing else. Don't spend a third of your life working that, first of all, may make you feel alienated, will yield less and less returns for your own personal well-being, and also is not striking at jobs nowadays are quite useless. Most of the production going on in the world does not really bring anyone happiness, and certainly does not bring Mother Earth happiness. So in a Disco, you will legally be required, just by virtue of what you put in your bylaws, to actually do restorative work with your time. The second is building whole community governance, and this is where the radical democracy in a Disco comes along. You know, one member gets one vote. A co-op only brings democracy within the cooperative structure, but ignores the whole economics. And this is based on the social care co-ops in places like Emilia-Romagna, where you have 4 types of privatizing healthcare, healthcare is given over to cooperatives. And one vote will be by the state, by the government, another vote will be by the doctors, another by the family members. So you can see that this lets more people speak about what is being done. There's a higher level of communication going on. The third DISCO principle is that DISCOs are active creators of commons. Resources built by the community for the benefit of the community according to its own rules. And in a DISCO, basically, it's do not create things or patents or IP. If we need information and best practices, we better save that information so that people can replicate the best strategies to mitigate climate, to mitigate hunger, to mitigate, the lack of inspiration. Share this as worldwide commons. And when I speak worldwide, I'm speaking also about digital commons. Localism. And cosmolocalism basically means that we can share designs in open source platforms, whether it's for housing, machinery, or any of the technologies that will allow us to have a decent life. But this can be manufactured locally. Meaning I can be living in Peru or I can be living in Switzerland and I want to build a house. And there's actually housing projects like WikiHouse, which lets you download the plans and manufacture them locally. Local manufacture is needs-based. You don't need to ship something over from usually China that will break down and will need to be shipped back to a recycling center, usually in the third world. You can actually create things for your community, in your community, that will last. The fifth principle is care work is the core, and this comes from a feminist economic background. In most workplaces, you're just looking at the productivist nature of the work, what you're getting done, but there's a lot of invisible work, and there's a lot of effective work that is just simply not counted and valued. So in DISCO, as we will see, we count that work, we actually value it, to stimulate and to visibilize it. And not only do we care for the humans within the organization, within the DISCO, but also as they are mission oriented for the mission itself. So imagine that, you get together with your crew, your collective, and you have this restorative mission. You want to bring care work towards that mission, like it was a living entity. The sixth principles is that reimagines the origins and flows of value. The value that we have right now, again, is based on monetary value, which is usually accrued by absentee shareholders and investors. So how about with a counting mechanism that will reflect the values that we want to see spread in the world? So DISCOs are also about accounting, and there's three types of values, which is livelihood work, which would be the goods and services that you offer, again, always towards social and environmental ends. Love work is voluntary work, which is something that all of us activists like to do, but sometimes we do not have the privilege or the time or the mental space to do it. But in a DISCO, that work is actually counted. And when you get paid from your livelihood work, from the normal work, you actually pay back this love work, this volunteer work. And the third is the care and invisible work. There's a whole set of economic programs and stuff that we have developed to make sure that this gets implemented and that these three flows of values are articulated in the day-to-day functioning of these organizations. And then the seventh is plan for federation. We've already seen the diagram of, like networks, how do they talk to each other, etc. Federation is really important. Networks, share certain things, but federations also share values. One of the things that is really exciting about federation is that many of these alternative economic projects can go beyond being just mere economic alternatives to being an economic counterpower. I'll give you an example. Up to 2017, cooperatives worldwide had an annual turnover of 3.5 trillion, which at the time was the market cap of Google, Amazon, Microsoft, Facebook, and Apple at the time. As we've seen with the COVID crisis, the market cap has gone up. Turnover is not the same as market cap. Turnover is based in real economy. Market cap is based on fictitious economy. But the example stands, meaning that cooperatives, these little things, if they were to network together, they can actually become a really important economic player. There's a quote by the noted deceased ecologist David Fleming, who you may be familiar with, and he said, large-scale problems do not require large-scale solutions. They require lots of small solutions within a large-scale framework. And this is a vision of DISCO. Small cooperatives which are working towards social and environmental ends, which are putting activism back where it belongs in the workplace, federating and mutualizing power with each other. So DISCO prototypes forms of ownership, governance, entrepreneurship, and value accounting. There's a whole lot more to DISCO. You can go to disco.coop and read all this stuff. But again, for the purposes of this discussion, and I'll turn my camera back on so you can see me. Hello. It's a way, it's a strategy, and it's a set of tools to make sure that all those people who are disenfranchised, all those people who may not have the privilege to do activism, all those people that will be most affected by climate, not in the global north, but elsewhere, can actually get together to do this work and reimagine economics from the bottom up. That's it.
Yes, Carol, thank you so much, Stako. Such great work. Can I just ask you, you know, what might seem like a really obvious question, but do you feel that what you're doing is like the next stage of the global cooperative movement that's been going on for decades? This is like evolution of that same thing, and you know that it just continues to grow, but in a very new, far more, you know, all systems go in a way.
I mean, yes, but obviously I would say that. And to us, I mean, DISCO has 7 principles which sit on top of the original cooperative principles. And cooperatives are kind of like a form to like, kind of like formalize the spirit of the commons into entities which are in the market. But many co-ops just behave like corporations, and they're kind of like checked out. And after 175 years, they haven't brought about the desired change. So DISCO gives you like a set of constraints to make sure that co-ops can actually, the 6th co-op principle is cooperation amongst co-ops, and it sits nicely on the wall of most co-ops, but it does not get implemented. But we're developing the tools to make sure that that does get implemented, yes. Yeah. But of course, I would say that because this is our critique, others may differ. It has been extremely successful. There's people writing to us wanting to create new DISCOs, and you know, it is a conversation going on within the co-op movement.
Yeah. And over the last 4.5 years that we've been doing the alternative, I have to say that, you know, the energy coming from what you're doing and what people are doing with you around the world has been remarkable. And I really want to make sure that more people pay attention and invest in this kind of work. So thank you so much. So now I'd like to do something a bit more unusual and just share my own space with Becky Birchall, who's the director. Who's the director of the Change Festival that I've been taking part in over this weekend. And yeah, Becky, would you like to just introduce yourself and say hello to the Humanity Rising audience here?
Hello, everyone. Lovely to join you all. So yes, my name's Becky Birchall, and I am the founder and director of Change Festival, which is a weekend arts festival happening at Warwick Arts Centre, which is in Coventry in the UK. And the festival is all around, this year the theme is Rise Up, and it's all around inspiring audiences to rise up to be an active player in the climate crisis. And we tell stories of hope and possibility and inspire people to think about what their own role is in creating change.
Thanks, Becky. And I wonder if, you know, one of the things that I've been saying, you know, up till now, the last 20 minutes or so, about the importance and the role of the arts in being able to help us to really shift our way of thinking, but also our way of being, you know, day to day on the planet in our communities. And I wonder if you could, you know, share a little bit about your thinking here, because I know so often when it comes to arts festivals or arts events or arts galleries, too often people think of arts as a sort of, you know, decoration or the thing that we do at the end of something, or something just to lift our spirits, you know. But, you know, I know from your work that it's really core to us being able to do anything at all. So can I just invite you to talk a bit about that?
Sure. Yeah. So We've actually got a wonderful artist in residence here this weekend called Lorna Rees, and she's got this great phrase, which is culture forms our future. And when we talk about culture, it's obviously very broad, and I think our understanding of the arts has become quite small and sometimes quite pigeonholed and quite corporate in many ways. But the arts is any kind of expression of our creativity. So yes, the arts has got a really important role to play, arts and culture, because when we're thinking about this huge job that we have of humanity at the moment, which can often feel very overwhelming and complicated, and confusing, because sometimes it feels sort of desperate and other times it feels hopeful. I think sometimes arts and culture can really pierce through that and can really help us see with clarity some of the ways that we might emerge through this, and some of the ways that we might find strength, either from stories of things that have already happened in the past that we can draw strength on, or through imagined possibilities of things that haven't yet happened. And storytelling's always been a huge part of our culture, from before we had stages or books or written word or Netflix or any of that. And so we kind of have to go back to that. This moment is calling us to go back to some very ancient wisdom, and one of our most amazing skills as humans is our skill as storytellers. So at its heart, Change Festival is about stories. It's about what are the stories that we need to hear in this moment that will help us and inspire us to realize our own place in the story that is now unfolding.
And two events that took place this afternoon, Rising Up, Reclaim, Rising Up, Reawaken. Yeah. Can you share a little bit about what you gleaned from those two events?
Yeah, so we had a talk series which was all around this invitation to rise up, and the one this afternoon, the Rise Up to Reclaim, was the whole Rise Up series is an invitation to rethink some of the stories that are holding us back. So the Rise Up to Reclaim one is about our idea of ownership. The story that we are all individuals that have to own things. So that might be as very simple as owning our house and all the sort of stress that brings. It also might be around our ideas of ownership of land. And as we know, this idea of ownership of land, for example, is a new one, relatively new in the case of human history. So this Rise Up to Reclaim invitation is about saying, are there new ways that we can imagine a future where we don't have these stories and these concepts holding us down? What would be the new story? What would be the new imagining of a future where that weight isn't holding us down? And the Rise Up to Reawaken is a similar invitation. It's this idea that we are awakening in this moment to new possibility. And what does that look like? What do we need to awaken to? Again, we've got all these kind of stories and cultural constructs that are perhaps holding us back from seeing the full picture of what's possible. And so the Rise Up to Reawaken is really about stepping out of our comfort zone and out of our known realms and stepping into new places, new communities, new ideas.
And obviously one of the great things about an arts festival is that it draws all kinds of people in a much more diverse way probably than a conversation would, so certainly in our work at communities, when we invite people to a conversation, there's always, certain people will join, people who share your values, people who are already in the conversation, but there are people that are excluded from that, they don't feel comfortable, whereas a festival will always, really reach out to people on their own terms, really. But one of the tragedies for the festival here is that you've decided to move on to something else. And as soon as this year's festival is over, you're about to embark on a whole new project. Do you just want to share that?
Yeah. So the new project that I'm embarking on is actually in the community where I live. So it's a small village in Dorset. And I've been working with my best friend Alice, who unusually owns the village itself, which is about 33 houses, and also the land, which is unusual and is also in many ways, problematic in terms of its sort of feudal model. But what it gives us is a really unique opportunity to reimagine the future of that land and that village in quite an ambitious and experimental way, which a lot of other communities don't have the autonomy to do because everyone's in their own separate ownership. So I guess we're sort of treating the village as if it is already community owned, even though structurally it's not, with the idea being what do we need to prepare for the future? What does a future of a rural community like that look like? So a lot of the imagining is around the land, how we change from this kind of industrial agricultural model that's currently the farming around there, how we bring it much back down to much more diverse things that we grow. So we're setting up a community-owned farm, which will actually be community owned, but it's also around how we integrate the community with that conversation that's happening, and that's where the really interesting work is, and actually that's where it crosses over with what I've sort of discovered through Change Festival, which is about this: everyone has a role to play. So in a community of 100 people, it's not an intentional community. Those people just live in the village and they love living in the village, but there's all different characters and there's all different skills and all different ideas. So for me, it is a very similar process. It's kind of a curation of people and ideas and how we bring all of that together in a really interesting way to do the same thing that I was trying to do with Change Festival, which is the sort of transformative model and idea. So as much as I've love doing Change Festival, I said to someone today, it's been like my PhD. It's been like the process through which I've learned and met incredible people, and now I sort of want to practice what I preach, which is about action. So I've kind of got all these amazing ideas, and now I'm like, okay, well, the way I can manifest that is on my doorstep in my community, and we're hoping through doing it there in the village that we will be trying out some things and learning from people that are already doing incredible things, and hopefully be a model for how to try and dare to do things differently, because we've got this unusual setup. We're able to do that.
Yeah, that's amazing. Well, thanks very much for giving us your time. I know that you've got to get back to running your festival, but that just to think about that transition, from really waking up, in a sense, as you said, waking up to something and then deciding to go ahead and do it. It's I watch the space basically. Yeah. I'll be writing about your can next year.
Great,
okay.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks. So that's me in my studio, and now I'd like to now we have the really big question that probably we're all thinking about, which is, here we are in this program talking about our communities and what it is that we can do, and the sense of what is possible is felt. But when we maybe switch off the computer and then, go back into the real world, and we're governed again by these old media systems, that may be difficult to sustain. So I'm going to invite now Shelley Alcorn and Roberto Hinestrosa to talk to us about a whole, really quite radical concept called the parallel polis. And I won't go into it myself. In fact, I'm just going to invite Shelley now to come on and tell us, in the first place, why do we need something more than the system that we have now? If we're thinking that we could just improve this system, why do we need to be able to do more than that? Shelley, are you there?
I am. Hello, and thank you, everyone. I realize that we're running into some time constraints here, so I will try to either talk fast or edit to ensure that Roberto has a moment at the end to present his idea. But what I really want to communicate today is all of these ideas are fantastic until they hit what happens on the ground in terms of crisis and in terms of chaos, and the importance for us to be able to acknowledge both sides of the coin and practice with the methodologies we would prefer, so that we build up that muscle so that we can use it in times of duress and stress. That's what this is really about. There is a fundamental tension between being limited beings on a finite planet and an infinite universe. And from the moment we really looked up from the fire to the stars, we began trying to define what our place was. We began to try and locate ourselves in a physical universe as conscious beings. And that kind of location requires mythology. It requires abstraction. It requires a mental model that you build underneath your beliefs. And your beliefs evolve, because your beliefs are first what you're taught, And then there are what you experience that may run counter to what you've been taught. And then there's agency and creativity that comes even later through experience and teaching. And that's really the whole point of what we're talking about. And we have developed two very powerful myths inside of our human communities. And some of those myths have to do with capitalism being the ideal economic system. One could argue it's done plenty of good. One could argue it's brought us to the brink of extinction. If I weigh those in the balance, it makes me consider perhaps the fundamental roots of how we have exercised and developed the capitalistic systems that we work within. And then there's this myth of governance, of politics, of how we make decisions for and collectively work together as people. And the problem with all of this is the fact that myths have real world consequences. And the real world consequences of the idea of a nation state, perhaps, which is just a myth, it's something we've created, it's an abstraction. We had city states, we had tribes, we had regional states. We've done all sorts of things. Currently, we have a nation state idea. It came out of empire and came out of all sorts of awful things. But we have this idea that we can arbitrarily look on the ground and draw a line and say, that side of the river is your side of the river, and this side of the river is my side of the river. And if you attempt to cross it, terrible things will happen. And we've seen that play out in the United States during the Trump administration, when we were taking children away from their mothers, and we were putting people in cages, and we were doing things that absolutely we would all find horrific, but we did it in the name of an abstraction, which is that's your side of the river and this is my side of the river. Cosmologically, that doesn't work because there is no actual place, but it's our drive to locate ourselves in space that allows us to create that kind of division. And that's a terrible division. It is a fundamental disconnect between us as people and the earth herself, because we are attempting to locate ourselves as bodily beings inside of this arbitrary system. So maintaining the current system, climate change, capitalism, political systems, democracies, whatever political system it is that you're talking about, depends on stability. And the power structures and the oligarchs and the folks with the money know that, and they will do everything possible to maintain that stability for as long as possible, regardless of the outcome. We just have to come to grips with that those power structures that have an invested system in maintaining that power structure are telling themselves a story that they have the right to do this, that they've earned it, that they know better, that they're the ones who are successful. And that mythology is driving us to the edge. And as systems continue to destabilize, as people are really waking up at COP26 and realizing, no one's coming to save us. They're not coming to save us. Fossil fuel companies aren't going to sit down and negotiate in good faith over global finance. That's insane. That's not going to happen. We've hoped that reason, and we've hoped that emotion, and we've hoped that empathy, and we've hoped that all of those things would overcome the myth of money. And they aren't. They're not overcoming the myth of money. And so as these systems destabilize, because climate change is not going to stop, that's physics. physics, an irresistible force is run up against what thinks it is an immovable object, and it's going to find out shortly that that is not the case. So we need a new mythology to look at and to think about as systems begin to collapse around us. This is hard work. This is not easy work. This is extremely hard because we have to overcome the tendency of ourselves to operate from a place of fear and to grab onto those solutions that are simplest, regardless of the consequences. This is what tyrants do. This is what authoritarians do. They offer a simple solution to a hyper-complex problem. And they do it by appealing to internal divisions that we've allowed ourselves to believe actually exist. And so it's no accident that there is a new kind of fascism on the rise globally. And I'd like to do a full program on this actually at some point, because I have a lot of material here. But looking at what we do, let's tell a new story, right? So let's tell a new story about what a parallel polis is. And what a parallel polis is it's not a structure, it's an idea. Because you need an idea. You don't need a structure. It's not a 5-point plan to develop a parallel polis. It's not how it works. What the concept of parallel polis does, which was developed by Václav Havel and Václav Benda and articulated in the 1970s in Czechoslovakia in the Charter 77 movement, was this idea that we're being governed in a totalitarian state and we don't have the resources or the ability to challenge that state directly without setting up that binary, right? So let's try to move under that and around that by developing a parallel system that we can practice with in our living rooms. And that includes a couple of very important parts. It included education. It was the #1 goal. Publication, publishing was huge. Underground publishing, papers, white papers, articles, writing so that the message could be communicated to as many people as possible. And then using art and theater as well as a way to continue to tell stories with different narratives in living rooms if necessary. Now it's a subversive theory. It is subversive because it is underground and it's coming up and surfacing. So yes, they did run into opposition from the government that they were developing a parallel polis to. But the idea was that you can't kill an idea. And that's what we need. We need unkillable ideas. And alternatives to think differently about how we can interact. So when I look at the idea of parallel polis and why I'm so interested in it and why I'm studying it so much, is using simply the idea, the simple idea that it doesn't have to be this way. And that we can create something different, even in opposition. And a lot of these things that we're talking about are very nice, but they function in a world where you still have the right to assembly. You still have the right to free speech. You still have food in the fridge and access to water and all of those things that make these ideas very comfortable. The type of parallel polis and the type of governance that I'm talking about is the type of thing that comes in play when there are limited food resources and we decide how to distribute them. That's when politics becomes real. No longer a theory, no longer a book, no longer a presentation. It becomes real. What political structure do we put in place when we're out of water? And how do we treat each other when that happens? That's the nature, the depth of thinking that has to go into a parallel polis. And it's going to play out differently in every single region of the world. It's going to be different based on the resources you have, the climate change that affects your area, the governance system that surrounds you, the stability in your governance system and your political system, military intervention from different quarters. All of these things will come into effect. Your response to it has to be based in a theory that has given you the idea to imagine the alternative. And parallel polis does that by giving you that mechanism that you can grab onto. So I really would, I'm really cutting this short, and I want to thank Indra for inviting me on the program. And I don't want to, people are always accusing me of being negative. It's like, I'm not negative, I'm practical.
Yeah.
I see what happens. We have to think differently, but thinking differently is not easy. It's not a PowerPoint presentation, and it's not something that we simply do in our living rooms. It's what we do with ourselves in those moments where we decide what action we will take and whether that's the right action or not. So thanks. Appreciate
Shelley,
it.
that was incredibly powerful, and I'm so grateful to you for sharing that vision with us. I'm going to invite Roberto Hinestrosa, because I think there's a thin line, isn't there, between prefiguring, and I think that what Roberto's doing at the moment in Mexico is with the same idea that you're describing, is prefiguring, in a sense, already building at this time, in real time, in this moment, the things that come that moment that you describe will be ready to receive and to act. This is the time. So Roberto, I could see we've left you very little time indeed, but I know that you can power pack something into the few minutes that we have. And please go ahead.
Thank you all. I want to invite you all to start thinking in a different way, as Shelley pointed. And what I see, what I propose is we step back a couple of step backs and look at it from a different time scale. So we needed a large history of cooperatives for discos to came now. So what we're doing is that we're composting the culture that we have. We're composting civilization in this century. And what will come from this compost substrate, and it's coming already, all the fungi, all the new plants that are coming. This is the future of humanity. And we're not only changing an era in the way that we've been doing in recent history, changing technology and energy source. But I think this is the opportunity for all humanity to gather our agency and really make a change of an era. So here I'm going to share a presentation to talk a little bit more about some ideas, some of the possibilities, and please let me know if you see the presentation.
It's there, Roberto. It looks good.
All right. So there is this question: how to build a parallel polis? Actually, you don't build it. Parallel polis is already happening with everything that we do. The transition towns, humanity rising, trust the people. We are all part of these new things happening that will constitute a parallel polis. Parallel polis emerge as we speak. And we can look at it as a process, as a context, and as a structure. As a process, we need to understand that and accept that we are at humanity's, and I think we are at humanity's coming of age. So it's time to let go of the things that don't work anymore, to compost everything. We are outgrowing what we had before, but we have to honor it. It took us to this moment. We needed to transit that history to be able to come of age. So let's honor the past and let's look for the future. Now, in this awakening, we're taking responsibility. So this is absolutely important, and we are finding the entrances to the new system. We're finding the entrances to the collective, to governance, to trust, to respect. So these are some of the things are in the substract from which the parallel police can emerge. I think we have plenty of questions on how to go into the future. And we can choose a path to keep our questions and at the same time keep walking to the future, keep walking to this new planet Indra proposed within Earth's regenerative capacity. For the first time in humanity, we have very specific opportunities. We never have the globalization or the technology enough to pull what we need to pull right now. And on top of it, we have a pandemic. The pandemic gave us the time to think about, to invest in ourselves, to look inside ourselves. So this is the moment. I agree with Inda. This is the moment when we can go into the future. The parallel policy is a way to take advantage of all of these opportunities, because and it's very when I see everybody talking about governments not doing what's going on in Glasgow, how can we expect that the very structures that put us into this will come with a solution? They were developed and designed to respond to different kind of things. So neither the financial system or governments are coming with solutions, and we cannot be crossing our fingers. So we go into the future because isolated persons, we have power, but it's isolated. So instead of being crossing fingers to see if the governments are going to do it, we can do it ourselves. We can network, we can gather collective power and do it together. The answer is us as network. To me, this is the future of humanity. So instead of how to build, what to build, a context. Parallel police can be an environment to promote and benefit local networks. Parallel police can be an incubator for things to happen, nurture the future. Zillion small groups of people connected, contributing, adding power. And there is a term Indra uses, I use it, a lot of people all over the world, we're using this citizen action network because it's like the obvious way to call what you do in the ground. And there are some characteristics of the cans that will be in that substrate. Community-based, community-oriented, sharing resources, self-organizing, autonomous and democratic, because the way forward is being together, unified in purpose. I love this quote. Imandit Kaur is someone that is already working. She is part of this emerging parallel policies, doing amazing work in Birmingham. And I use it because she put the light into one of the things that we really need to develop for the future, which is governance. What kind of governance do we need, and why do we need governance? Because we can only move at the speed of trust. We really need to go back to trust the person in the other side of the river. So we need governance that includes the subjective, that has different levels of competence, a real governance for real people in real situations. About the structure, and I'm going to pass slides very fast so you can look at it moving, and then come back and make a few commentaries. Okay, so that's a way, that's something that can happen if we start investing in the parallel police hard, a governance and a coordination software. We need to make this, as Staco was talking, federative or a federation and a work alliance. So we need tools to do that, because a lot of people doing things in the world, it's already happening, but we are not connected. So we can invest in that, and from there we will have like a docking network. This software can be the docking network where territorial coordination happens, and groups of people can, cooperatives, local businesses can come together and start building these hearts and brains, local hearts and brains. And when we put them together and we dock them at a global level, we can have something like this. The whole system together with global coordination, territorial coordination, autonomy in the governance at each level, cosmolocal network. And I wonder how many cans do we need? How many groups of people do we need for the parallel police to emerge? For this heart to pump the new planet? For this brain to outsmart the former system? For the parallel police to act as an organism? I leave you with this invitation. Thank you.
Wow, thank you so much. And I'm so glad that together with Shelley, Roberto, that you've finished on this very challenging, very evocative, still somehow very possible note. And it's a great way to bring the whole question of citizens' action to a close. It's the very antithesis of feeling that citizens have no power. Really, what you've managed to evoke together with Shelley, and with my great thanks to Anira, to Stacco, and to Becky too, I sense that citizens' action ultimately, can challenge the current system. And of course, with 7.9 billion of us, we certainly should be able to do that. So thank you once again. And I think that brings us really to a close for this session. And I don't know if Jim's there and wants to come up again and to close the session, but our time is up, and thank you so much. We'll be available for repeated viewing on the Humanity Rising website. And until the next time, thank you everybody for taking part. Thank you.
Thank you, Indra. Thank you all. That has been a very illuminating discussion today, starting from the streets of Glasgow and then to what's being done to help trees. We see the power of citizen action, but we also see the power of governments not to respond to citizen action. And so we're in one of those moments in history where possibilities and contradictions abound. And how we navigate at this critical hour, Indra, as you and your panel have suggested, within the increasing chaos of our world, where we're now in code red. So that means we are now inevitably going to be experiencing escalating and increasingly lethal ecological turbulence. What does citizen action mean in a time of escalating contextual turbulence? It's one thing to have social political turbulence. You look back over history and we see plenty of that. And then when you add to that ecological turbulence, then you have an admixture that is going to challenge all of us in unprecedented ways. And the whole notion, everyone, of citizen action networks is probably the only pathway that I can think of through this thicket. Because I think we're getting pretty clear at the end of COP26, the governments aren't going to do anything. The corporations aren't going to do anything other than to continue the rapacious exploitation of community and people. That's abundantly clear. And so how we organize ourselves in this moment as the people of the world to secure the future of our children and the abundance of the larger ecosystem could not be a more important idea, question, mystery, koan to contemplate, because as I think, Indra, you said at the beginning, here on the one hand, you have maybe a couple thousand people in government taking us off the cliff. And on the other side, we have nearly 8 billion people who basically care, but as Roberto said, basically are isolated. So the question that we've contemplated, everyone, today is really the $64,000 question, as we say in the United States, that if we could answer it effectively, robustly, could change the world. Because when you look back over history, it's when the people, whether it's the French Revolution or the Chinese Revolution or the Velvet Revolution in the Czech Republic, mass movements, the civil rights movement, the women's movement, when the people get together, even governments topple, because that's the strongest force in the world. So how we move from our isolation, which is so apparent, to unity, which is so possible,
Absolutely.
is what we've got to contemplate. And that's why, Humanity Rising and all our hundreds of partners and live streaming partners and so forth, why we've done these 12 days during the COP is around these questions of how citizens united, can never be defeated. And so that's the challenge of the hour. So Indra, I really want to thank you. And the panel, I really want to thank you for your willingness to approach this great question of our time. So thank you very, very much. And then tomorrow, everyone, we're going to go into the complexities of cities. Most of the human race now lives in cities. And Marilyn Hamilton, the founder of Integral Cities Meshworks, is going to talk to us with a very distinguished panel like today on how cities can be regeneration hubs for Gaia. So that'll be our theme tomorrow. And as usual, we'll hear from various people there in Glasgow and elsewhere who are engaging in direct action at this very critical time. You're all welcome to the after session chat. If you're inclined, the link is in the chat box. But thank you all for joining us on this 7th day of the Conference of Parties. And we'll see you all again tomorrow, same time, same station, to contemplate how cities can contribute to the redemption that we all so passionately seek. But Indra, thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye for now, everyone.
Thank you.
See you tomorrow.